Jr. was born in Alabama on August 2, 1955, to parents John Sr. and Julia Christie. He was the couple's first child, and they would go on to have 4 more children, 2 girls and 2 boys. His father was in the military and served in the Army Medical Corps as a logistics specialist. His job meant that the family moved around a lot as a child, moving to different states of the U.S. and even to Germany. Life was difficult with the constant moving, and Julia, in particular, suffered. She battled with severe depression, and it's easy to forget that back in those decades, mental illness were not treated like they are today. Julia adored her son, and John knew that. He too loved his mother dearly, but he struggled to get his father's approval. John Sr. was prone to outbursts of anger, and he ran the home like a military operation. Julia didn't escape his rules and was often on the receiving end of her husband's temper. John's father left the military in 1970 and took a job as a hospital administrator in Oregon. John finally felt settled after years of moving around. He had started high school, made the football team, and began to make friends, something that he had always found difficult since the family was always moving. Come John's sophomore year, his father moved the family again. This time it was to Dumont, New Jersey, as he was offered a job in New York. It was here that John later graduated from Dumont High School. Julia would be institutionalized for 18 days after the family had moved to Dumont. Julia's way of coping with her depression was through drinking. She became an alcoholic, and obviously this didn't help her depression at all. On December 5, 1972, John Sr. said he was going to send Julia to a psychiatric hospital in New Jersey. This absolutely terrified her and resulted in her becoming hysterical when she found out, so much so that a doctor had to come out and administer a sedative. John was watching this all unfold. On December 6th of 1972, Julia drove out to a spot along the Hudson River. It was here that she would take her life with a 9mm Glock. Her body was found later that day. The whole thing was obviously incredibly traumatic for John. He had actually been the last one to speak to Julia that morning, and he was racked with guilt for not feeling like he had done enough to help his mother. John buried his head into his schoolwork and graduated a year early from high school. John Sr. married his second wife, Kathy, just a year after Julia took her life. John then went to Fairleigh Dickinson University. He had initially majored in pre-med before moving to accounting. John began to show signs of his father's same explosive rage around this time and ended up dropping out of university in 1976. He did this after he had been convinced to join and tour with a rock band. In 1977, the tour ended and John still didn't want to go back to college. John spiraled after this and got into some trouble with the law after that for using illegal drugs. He was charged with delivery of a controlled substance for which he received a suspended sentence. This is what pushed John to join the Marines. John became a sergeant in the Marines before leaving in 1982 and going back to college. John moved to Dallas, Texas, to be closer to his father and stepmother. Here he took night classes to become a certified public accountant. During this time, he even did some modeling after his stepmother convinced him to take some headshots. John did end up qualifying as and becoming an accountant. John's first marriage was to Michelle Ward Getty. The couple would have a child together, a daughter called Christy. This is when the first signs of John's abuse would emerge. Michelle was an attorney who had actually graduated top of her class in law school. She had a son prior to her marriage to John and received a job offer in Dallas, which is when the couple was introduced. John was said to be a charming man who embraced her son like his own. Michelle and John had some time alone in the spring of 1984 after her son went to Louisiana to spend some time with his father. The couple got offered an apartment in New York for a holiday, as the friend who owned it was away. This was the first trip together. Michelle firmly believes that while she had gone out to run an errand, John had taken some kind of substance. She recalled him having this goofy look on his face, but he adamantly denied he had taken anything. February of 1985, the couple went to New Orleans to celebrate Mardi Gras and meet Michelle's family. They decided to drive, and this is when Michelle first caught a glimpse of John's darker side. While they were on the road, a group of rowdy-looking teenagers had overtaken them and then slowed down. This really pissed John off, and Michelle later recalled that his face visibly changed in front of her. John then started reaching down and digging through a duffel bag to find something. Keep in mind that he is the one driving at this point. Michelle then offered to help him get what he was looking for until she found out what it was. John had brought a handgun with him on the trip. Michelle refused to help him get the gun, and she moved the bag to where he couldn't reach it. John then sped up and got past the car. While doing so, he let out a string of awful language that Michelle had never heard him use before. This whole situation set alarm bells off in Michelle's mind, and when they got back to Dallas, she had decided that she wasn't interested in continuing their relationship. But some unexpected news threw a wrench in her plans. Michelle found out she was pregnant despite having been on birth control. This is why Michelle married John, as having a child out of wedlock was frowned upon back then, especially in the South. They had only been married for a month when John just disappeared for 2 days. He then called Michelle and said he was coming back to explain everything. It turns out that he had been staying with an ex-girlfriend, Janet. Michelle avoided making the big deal out of the news as John had just passed his CPA exams. But this wasn't the end of the Janet saga. There was later a confrontation between the three and some things were revealed. John had been living somewhat of a double life. He had been telling Michelle one thing and Janet another, even saying he was going to take the baby he was having with Michelle and raise it with Janet. But during this confrontation, he told Janet that he didn't want to continue things with her. Michelle and John found a new home to move into and began the pack-up. Michelle called out to John while she was packing some things and asked for help. He wasn't interested in offering any. She was 5 or 6 months pregnant at this stage. Again, a big red flag. But that wasn't the worst part. Later that evening, Michelle went to John and again asked for his help. His response was to jump out of his seat and wrap his hands around Michelle's neck, telling her he would help when he was ready to. This incident terrified Michelle. Things didn't improve, and later that year, John threw her son into a wall and in a separate incident, kicked him. Michelle felt stuck. Now John was showing signs of abuse toward her son, who she believed he adored. But she had a child with him. This wasn't the person that she once knew. It's important to keep in mind that John wasn't like that all the time. His outbursts were separated by times of happiness for the family, which led to Michelle feeling even more confused. Christy Battaglia was born on November 10, 1985. Once Christy was born, John focused his abuse back on Michelle and never hit her son again. Michelle soon figured out a pattern to John's explosions. He would blow up every 3 months, like clockwork. He once assaulted her outside of Christy's school, and on another occasion he broke her nose. A final incident took place, and Michelle had had enough and filed for divorce. John quit his job so that Michelle had to pay him spousal support and child support. She received counseling during this time to ensure she didn't go back to him. John continued to abuse Michelle despite them being separated. He watched her from outside her home and would sneak inside when she drove into their garage. At a later court hearing for the divorce, John lost his cool and lunged at Michelle. This resulted in a restraining order being granted against him, which meant he wasn't allowed to talk to Michelle or her son. If John violated this, he could face a year in prison and a $2,000 fine. In 1987, John pled guilty to a misdemeanor charge after one of these assaults and was given a 2-year probation period. This made him incredibly angry. Despite being divorced, John continued to threaten Michelle. He continuously harassed her and even broke into her house while she slept. At this point, Michelle was fearing for her life. This carried on for a long time, but thankfully, she escaped alive and she would be able to move on from the man who tormented her so violently by moving to another state as John moved on to someone new. Then came his marriage to Mary Jean Pearl. Mary lived in Highland Park, Texas. They would get married on April 6, 1991, and have 2 daughters together. Mary Faith was born in 1992, and Liberty May was born in 1995. Both girls attended Bradfield Elementary School in Highland Park. Mary left John in January of 1999 after he had been abusing her, as he had done to Michelle for years. He was not allowed to live with her after this. In December of that same year, around Christmas time, John had been visiting Faith and Liberty when he attacked Mary. This resulted in him pleading guilty to a misdemeanor assault charge, and he was again given a 2-year probationary period. It was pretty much a slap on the wrist for John. Mary filed for divorce immediately after this incident, and the divorce was finalized in August 2000. Mary had tried to have John's parole revoked on numerous occasions, as he was continuously harassing her over the telephone. He wasn't allowed to have contact with her, and she said he should be put in prison considering his history of domestic violence. She also knew he had used or been using marijuana, which was a violation to the terms of his probation. As much as he was a nightmare of a husband, all reports indicated that John was a doting father. He had never hit either of his daughters, and until he did what he did, Mary didn't believe he would hurt the girls. This was the reason that John was allowed occasional visits with his daughters. But little did anyone know what was to come. On May 2, 2001, Mary left Faith and Liberty with John for a dinner at the mall. John didn't take them to the mall, though. He took them straight to his apartment in the Adam Hatch Lofts in Deep Ellum in Dallas. John then phoned Mary from his apartment, and while she was on the call, he shot and killed their 2 daughters, 6-year-old Liberty and 9-year-old Faith. John made Faith ask her mom the following question while on the phone. "Why do you want Daddy to go to jail?" Just before she was shot, Faith cried out, "No, Daddy, please don't do it." Mary begged her girls to run, but it was too late. John didn't just shoot the girls once. He grabbed his gun and shot Faith 3 times and Liberty 5 times. He then told Mary, "Merry fucking Christmas," presumably referencing the Christmas assault. Mary hung up and called 911 after he had murdered both of his daughters. John left a message on the answering machine in their bedroom. "Hi, girls. I just want to tell you how very, very brave you were, and I hope you're resting in a better place now. I wish that you had nothing to do with your mother. She's evil and vicious and stupid." As if he hadn't just murdered his 2 daughters, John then went to a tattoo shop and got 2 roses tattooed on him to represent his daughters. He was arrested soon after this, but didn't go down easily and ended up getting into a fist fight with the police officers. 16 firearms were subsequently confiscated from his home. The girls' funeral was held at Our Redeemer Lutheran Church, and they were buried at Hillcrest Cemetery in North Dallas with Pearl's father. John Battaglia's capital murder trial started on April 22, 2002. He was represented by Paul Johnson and Paul Boschel. The lead prosecutor was Howard Blackmon. It took jurors just 19 minutes to decide that John should be convicted of the highest charge, which is capital murder. His lawyers argued that he should not receive the death penalty because he had bipolar disorder, but on April 30, 2002, the same jury sentenced him to death. Mary had the following to say to him after he was sentenced: "Burn in hell forever." She also said, "You are one of the most heinous murderers of modern times. I would like to say the next time you see me is when they put the needle in your arm. But I'm not going to waste the time to be there." Mary did end up going to John's execution almost 16 years later. Death sentences are automatically appealed, and John's appellate attorneys attempted on numerous occasions to have his sentence changed from death to life without parole. He was initially set to be executed on March 30, 2016, but the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals issued a stay so that a ruling could be made on John's lawyer's claims that he was not mentally competent to be executed. This wasn't challenged by the state of Texas, and his execution was postponed to a later date. John was given an execution date of December 7, 2016. On August 15, 2016, just 5 days before he was due to be put to death, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals issued another stay of execution for John again due to questions regarding his mental competency. His attorneys were given 60 days to argue before the Court of Criminal Appeals. On September 20, 2017, John's mental incompetence claim was dismissed by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. A mental health expert had even testified at a November 2016 hearing that John Battaglia was likely faking his symptoms to delay his execution. The appeals court felt the same way. On October 31, 2017, John's death warrant was signed, and his execution date was set for February 1, 2018. John's team continued to appeal this, but it didn't work, and on February 1 at 9:40 p.m., John Battaglia was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville. When someone is executed, there are 2 separate viewing areas. One is for the convict's friends and family or supporters, and the other is the victim's side. As I mentioned earlier, Mary Jean Pearl did end up attending John's execution, and she stood in the victim's side. No one was in the convict's side. John spotted Mary in the witness room and said, "Well, hi, Mary Jean." He then turned to the warden and said, "I'll see you later. Bye. Go ahead, please." As Mary walked away, all she could say was, "I've seen enough of him." The murder of Faith and Liberty led to Toby Goodman sponsoring a bill in the Texas state legislature that would get judges to consider a parent's history of domestic violence when making the decision to allow unsupervised parental visitation. The Texas Senate unanimously passed the bill, and it was signed into law and took effect on September 1, 2001, just 4 months after the girls were murdered. The judge who dismissed John's assault charges, David Finn, in a previous hearing, resigned from his position a year after the murders, but he did run for Dallas County District Attorney. Mary campaigned against David as she believed that it was his ruling that had kept John out of prison, which resulted in her daughters being so cruelly taken away from her. David Finn didn't win the election. The actions of John Battaglia are beyond comprehension, and the fact that he tried to avoid execution for so long after what he did showed a real lack of remorse. John clearly had an intense, deep hatred of Mary, which was evident by his final words to her. He had taken away her 2 beautiful daughters, making her listen to the gunshots that would kill them. But still, he was incapable of apologizing or admitting he was wrong. Nothing good can ever truly come from a case like this, when 2 young lives are taken. But hopefully, the bill passed in their honor has helped other children avoid their fate.